Should we do some burping exercises?
I think
Well,
that would, I really miss our daily burps.
I try to do it with the boys, but they just aren't
They're
as
not,
fun.
it's just
They just like, oh, mom.
pathetic. Right, I am going to get started. My name is Morna Gerard, and I'm interviewing Pam Hackbart-Dean in conjunction with Georgia State University's Special Collections and Archives 50th anniversary celebrations. The date is June 10th, 2020, and we are conducting this interview remotely via Zoom. Pam, do I have your permission to record this interview?
Yes.
Great. So first question I want to ask you is, when were you hired by Georgia State University Special Collections and Archives?
I was hired in June of 2000.
Okay. And what was your position and your responsibilities?
I was hired as a Southern Labor Archivist, and in this position, I reported to the head of Special Collections, but really my responsibility was for the day-to-day activities of the labor archives. At that point, I supervised one full-time employee as well as extra help and students. I worked with donors, initiating contacts or negotiating transfer and disposition of their collections. Also in my role as labor archivist, I determined the processing priorities, organized and cataloged and described our collections in the labor archives in all sorts of formats. We were part of a MARC cataloging project, and so I oversaw the completion of that statewide project for special collections, but I also was the one to begin doing the encoded archival descriptions for our finding aids. We were first doing the Southern Labor Archives as part of a pilot projects that would later include all the units within special collections. I spent a lot of time doing appraisal and weeding, as well as doing some basic preservation for our collections. And we all at that point had provided general reference services, as well as anything specific to the labor archives, doing classes and orientations, coordinating exhibits, and doing outreach activities to promote the use of our collections.
Awesome. Can you tell me why you decided to work at Georgia State and in special collections? What attracted you to the position to Georgia State?
My interest really was with labor history. I received my master's in history at the University of Connecticut, and my focus was on U.S. labor history. And so I had the academic background, and I was just very interested and passionate about being able to work in a collecting area that had been of interest to me during my graduate career, and being able to document the stories that I had started as a graduate of the extraordinary work of ordinary people really resonated with me, and I just wanted to be able to do work in an area I was very passionate about.
That's great. That's a really nice fit for you then.
It was.
I didn't know that about you.
Oh, you didn't?
I knew that that's where you got your degree, but I didn't know that was your focus.
Yeah.
That's great. Can you tell me about the donor base that you had for the Southern Labor Archives?
When I began, we had a donor base of the local labor community. I think that was because that's who actually helped start the Southern Labor Archives, the Atlanta Labor Council, some of the Ussery, let me see if I get this right, the Ussery, Bill Ussery Center, at that point also had a labor history program that worked closely with us. We also had ties to the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers. And these were donors that, when I began, actually were supportive but had been neglected for a while and needed to be re-engaged. They had not only provided collections for the Southern Labor Archives, but they also had in the past also provided funding for the archives to be able to do more in-depth specialized projects. So being able to re-engage our community, and on campus we had also had with the history department in the 90s and early 2000s, also had a Southern, a labor history program that we found were supportive of the archives, and we were able to collaborate with them on projects as well as the College of Education. We wanted to be able to start doing some online curriculum in labor history. And so just being able to get that constituency and they to support the archives, but also to take it to the next level and build on that.
Tell me, what was your favorite collection?
You know, my favorite collection actually was a collection that came out of Tennessee. It was like a local that worked for the Tennessee Valley Authority. And I just found it very interesting because you had this sleepy town with in Tennessee that grew because of the Tennessee Valley Authority, and they were making sure that the workers were getting fair wages, health benefits, job security. And I just being able to look at their original records that went back into the 30s up until, I think the collection went up to the 70s, to just see how supportive that union was. And I would say the other, oh my goodness, I wish I could remember the name. It was a collection that West, I'm sorry, I meant to look this up for you, Marna. He was a he was a lawyer. He went to law school in North Carolina. He had friends who were communists. He was out trying to he was an organizer for the CIO. He was out in North Carolina, and he was not allowed to sit for the bar exam. He received death threats from the KKK. He would move around the country organizing from Georgia up to Pennsylvania. And it was a very fascinating collection of this one man who gave so much of his life to be able to fight for the rights of others, even though he could have sat back and been a lawyer and probably made a nice living in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, but instead he never joined the Communist Party, but because the CIO had affiliation, some of their members he was automatically considered a communist, and that's of course during the time of the McCarthy era. Don West, and I think it was one of the best collections that his daughter had been moving around the country with her, and she gave it to us, and it's such a rich collection. I can't believe with all the moves and all the terror that they had to endure growing up, that she had as much of that story to be able to tell. So I guess what I really am always excited about are those collections about the organization of the organizers and going out and giving pamphlets. And as you know, Georgia's a right to work state, so it would have been he would send his wife to some of the factories in Georgia to hand out pamphlets, because it was safer for her to go in and hand out pamphlets than he, as a white man, to go in, because there were Southern gentlemen supposedly that he felt like would not do her any harm. But his whole, I think he's one of those unrecognized, but provided so much to the history of the labor movement, especially in the South. And sorry, I couldn't remember the name.
I love to kind of have a look at that collection. It sounds like something that would be great for using for teaching.
Oh, I think so.
In all of the materials that you worked with, what was the most unique item that you had your hands on?
I want to say the unique item was the official charter of the International Association of Machinists. It was founded in 1888 in Atlanta, Georgia, in a train yard. And to see what became of a small group of train engineers, just to where it went beyond, and now they're celebrating over a century, and I can do this, like 130 years, just to be able to see that original document with the I guess the founders of that organization. I thought that was very inspiring.
That's great. One of the things that all of our collections have to do is like raise money. Can you tell me about fundraising for the Southern Labor Archives?
Sure. One of the first groups that I worked with was the Atlanta Labor Council. I spent time repairing our relationship with the council. They they used to host an annual dinner, and you would buy tables, and the Southern Labor Archives had for years been a recipient or a beneficiary of the funds raised from that annual dinner. And when I began, somehow that relationship had been lost. So rebuilding that relationship resulted in us renewing the archives to being a beneficiary again, and we were able to use that funding to continue on with the Voices of Labor Oral History Project, which had been put on pause, to update and enhance greatly the online labor history curriculum project, to create some traveling exhibits that we were able to do, and to do some about what the labor archives, what it could do for them, but also how we could collaborate and do things together. So it kind of took out, I think it also provided travel funding for researchers to come in and use the collection. I also worked closely with the International Association of Machinists. I raised about $200,000 with them to fund first the they gave us about $75,000 to be able to hire a physician to process their collections. We had a lot of their small collections that we need to get more. We also did an digitization microfilming project where we microfilmed their journal, which started, I think, in the late 1800s up into the present. And from the microfilm, then we created digital copies and put those online, which there still are. At that point, the project cost about $125,000. That include the majority of that was spent on just doing the physical, and GSU actually then in special collections, the labor archivist actually did all the metadata work, putting that online. So we probably spent, in man hours, probably about the same amount. But it was our really first big in-depth digital project, and that was around 2004, 2005. So at that point, we were kind of cutting edge, I'd like to think. Working with, we were able to also get some grant funding through the Georgia Historic Records Advisory Board. We did kind of a collaborative project with the Spelman, I want to say Emory University, I can do this, the Atlanta Public Library, kind of documenting nursing collections that were held by multiple institutions. And from that, then we went, and I was able to get an NHPRC grant to process our Southern Nurses Association history records, which also included doing some processing at the Atlanta Public Library and Spelman too. But a lot of time it was working with the Atlanta Labor Council, which also, because it's Atlanta Labor Council, you were able to get a majority of different unions and being able to get their support financially, as well as providing a way to make introductions. So as we wanted to do these projects, whether it was oral histories or gather collections, they made doors open to us. The other big donor that Labor Archives had the opportunity to work with was Bill Ussery, who was a financial donor to the library, and he was very good about helping us to introduce us to, like, the president of the International Association of Machinists, because that was where his background, that's where he began, was with the IAM in Macon, Georgia. And so we didn't work as much with the IAM in Atlanta. We worked with the national headquarters in Upper Marlboro in Maryland. And I think he was able to also provide funding when we wanted to do special projects, mostly with his papers, but labor movement generally.
You're busy. What would you say are your greatest challenges in your time as archivist with Southern Labor Archives?
I think our biggest challenge really was with the backlog. We had labor collections can be rather large, voluminous. We seemed to have collections in that off-site storage. What's the name of that building? I'm sorry. The one that
it was the Alumni Hall at that time?
Yes, at that time, Alumni Hall. We had some collections that we really should never have accepted. For example, we had one that was from San Francisco, which really didn't fit into our collecting policy at all. It was like a labor law collection. We just needed to be able to get control, and this was before MPLP. I think we were already kind of doing that, but just trying to get inventories and just getting an idea of how much we had. I think it's a balancing act, being able to get control of what you have, knowing what you need to do to make things interesting. I think also the Southern Labor History Program was not as active as it had been in the past. I think part of it that the George Meany Center had started offering certificate programs that a lot of labor unions were sending their members to. So I think just trying to make the labor archive still relevant. And I think we started to make, it was beyond just Southern labor history, that there was social justice things going on. I think we were just starting to kind of build on, we are more than just one story kind of thing. And I think also some of the challenges were these projects that were started, such as Voices of Labor, oral history, such as the online curriculum, to get these, I think with donors especially, to be able to, when people donate towards something, to be able to show some results from some of the projects that they help fund, whether it, I think you had the Merle Reed traveling scholarship where people from outside of Georgia State could come and use the labor history collection for their research, and that had been kind of dormant. So just kind of revitalizing the program.
What did you like most about being the archivist for Southern Labor Archives?
I really, really liked our donors. We had a really good group. Majority were men, but they were very interested in making their collections available. The labor community, they really wanted labor history to be taught in schools, which I think there is actually a law in the Georgia law books that require that Georgia labor history be taught. One of those unfunded mandates. They were very supportive of gathering their stories and making them accessible to everybody. And they were a very helpful group. I could not be a member of a union, but they still allowed me to come to their meetings as their guest. They allowed me to make presentations at their local and statewide meetings, and they were, especially when I stepped down in my position as labor archivist, they were extremely welcoming to Lauren Cada, the archivist that came in, the next Southern labor archivist, and I just appreciated their support and their practical, like, what is it that you need to make this happen? We want our journals online. What would it take to be there? And so they would allow me to come up with a business plan, come to their executive council and make my pitch. And then when we got done with the project, to come and show it to their members. And I always felt like, I never felt like an outsider. They were very embracing and allowing me to be part of their community, even though technically I wasn't.
That's great. So tell me, when did you become department head?
That's a good question. Let me see. I became department head. First I was interim, and then I became head of the head of the department in 2002.
Okay. And at that point, were you still over the Southern Labour Archives as well?
Yes.
And how long did that go on for?
Well, I think technically when I became head of special collections, I also was director of the Southern Labor Archives. I was able to hire Lauren in 2003.
Okay, cool. So let's talk about being department head. So how did you build support for the department within the library or within the university?
How did I build support? I would say building support started with enhancing our relationships with colleges on campus, such as the Women's Studies program on campus, which was very interested and part of why we had a women's history collection at that point. The history department, especially the public history department, they were teaching oral histories and an archives class. And so, you know, at that point, special collections was teaching the archives class as part of the history program, working more collaboratively with the College of Education. I think it was the English department really trying to start expanding, doing more with others on campus. You had some of the best resources on campus, the School of Law, the Essery Center, at that point, probably it was more in the humanities, social sciences area of campus that I focused on, working really closely with the development office, the Georgia State Development Office and the Alumni Association. So I think building support in the community outside the library as well as within the library was something I was really trying to do. When I began, it was a little special collections was seen as the place that was kind of behind the behind the closed curtains, so to speak, and all they ever did was have parties and get to do fun things. And we were kind of independent, seen as independent, and not really part of the library as a whole. So I think also working more with departments within special collection, within the library, such as we worked a lot with systems. I remember sitting down with Doug Goins and having to go through the priorities. He would show me his priorities for the library, and I'd show him the priorities for special collections, and we'd have to make them fit together, to working with cataloging and just trying to get into reference and instructions so they would remember to include special collections and archives in their instruction classes. And I think it was all about just building those relations, either from scratch or rebuilding them.
Yeah. Did our collecting scope for the department change or expand or refocus at all during the time you were there?
Yeah, I would say first I began working to expand the collection focus of the women's collection, which at that point was to focus on the Equal Rights Amendment movement, and to start like going beyond that. And I would say part of that was by advocating and finally being allowed to hire a full-time archivist for the women's collection. At that point, had only been a part-time, and then a compromise, which you know directly, was part-time women's archivist, part-time processing archivist, which we ended up being able to get 2 full-time faculty positions out of that. Working with Cliff Kuhn to provide oral history training to reinvigorate the Georgia Women's Movement Oral History Project. We had volunteers who had been doing it, but it was good to kind of review our practices, and Cliff was very good. I know he went beyond after I left too. And we started doing, and I know you've done a whole lot more since then, but we started doing the fundraising again with the salons, which I still think is a great, awesome idea, to bring in speakers and meeting at people's houses and talk. And this was kind of not only for the women's collection and special collections, but it also worked with the women's studies program. And I think it really kind of helped build those collections and relationships. I would say with music, we were starting to focus more broadly on the Atlanta music scene. Beyond the Johnny Mercer collection, we had gotten down to pretty much the item level in the Johnny Mercer collection. So being able to go beyond the country music influence, and we had hoped to start collecting in more the hip hop arena. The labor archives, I wanted to be able to expand and kind of figure out, because we had the labor movement, we had the women's movement, if we could begin getting some of, we're telling, we had the Georgia Documentation Project, to be able to make sure that although they're separate areas, that we are still combining these to be able to collaborate and build on those stories. So I wanted to be able to document the women's side of the story in the labor movement, and I was able to work and get the Transport Workers Union and Association of Flight Attendants collection, which is when the Delta flight attendants tried to unionize, and we know that did not work out. We also were able to get the 9 to 5 Atlanta working women collection as well. So to be able to, we had the women's collection, but make sure that the labor collection was also going in that area as well.
Yeah, that was a good combination, I think, for sure. Were there any organizational changes that took place within the department?
One thing that I tried was to not be have every area soloed. I felt like when I began as a labor archivist, we had the labor archives where I had Annie Tilden, who was my staff with some students, and then you had University Archives, which at that point was in a different part of the library altogether. University Archivist was no longer reporting to the head of special collections. You had the women's history collection, which was part-time, the Georgia Documentation, which was part of history, but not, we kept the collection, but Cliff Kuhn was doing that, and the photograph. So things were getting processed in one area, but not others. Everyone did reference, but so I tried to make it where we were more by function than, so that everybody, every curatorial area could get some, we could all be like, when we process a collection, by having a processing team, the finding aids would all be the same. We were now into the wonderful world of encoded archival description, having style sheets to make sure we were following all the same standards and best practices, that we had a curatorial area where you could be an expert in labor history or women's studies or university archives, and you would be doing more donor work and outreach, and then you would also, there was an reference area. Everybody did reference, but I was hoping that by more the function area, you could focus more instead of having to feel, I had heard too many complaints, and as the labor archivist too, you had to do it all and all by yourself, do donor relations, process, outreach, reference, and trying to be able to focus your energies, even though that you still had a lot to do, you know, that you wouldn't have to be a team of one, maybe two, and having to do the work of 10 people.
Yeah.
So that's what, you know, that was kind of the organization change I made at that point.
Did the mission of the department change at all while you were department head?
I think our changed in that our mission was to make our collections accessible and encourage use. I think before, and I think that, you know, part of it was being able to get our collections cataloged into WorldCat, to getting our finding aids online for all our collection areas, and being more active in the community to promote what we were doing and encouraging use. I think before, you know, not necessarily the best kept secret, but I don't know that we were doing as much as we could to let people know what we had.
Yeah. What were your personal priorities during this time?
I think my priorities really were to get the help needed to be able to be a vibrant special collections. I really wanted us to be kind of a leader in the Atlanta area in archives. I think being able to be seen as a resource, also maybe we were never going to be bleeding edge, but that we were one of the major stakeholders and that we wanted to be in discussions. And I wanted us to show that we had a strong and vibrant program, and we're passionate about what we were doing.
Great. And what about like department priorities? I guess did they change?
I would say the department priorities really changed in, well, you're going to see my passion. Really, the priorities was to make our collections accessible, to get things processed, to get the backlog down, and get things online.
It's good. That's a good set of priorities, I think. What challenges did you face as department head?
Well, some of the challenges, of course, we all face is, of course, the lack of storage space. We had Alumni Hall, which was 2 blocks away, that had storage space. That's where Special Collections had originally started, but we kept losing more and more space over there. We had really high shelving, which sometimes could be dangerous. I know, for example, things fell on top, and one time hit like Annie Tilden on the head with a steel plate. And then if you brought it back to our building, the main library, you would have to cross a couple city blocks there was no really way like you could drive over there and pick it up and drive back. And it was completely full. Our space in the library was full. So trying to figure out the best use of space as well as the best workspace for the staff. Since I also wanted to increase our staff, I wanted to increase our expertise, such as in oral histories, subject areas. But I think the biggest challenge I faced becoming department head in special collections was with unhappy donors or frustrated donors.
How did you deal with that?
Um, I wish I could say I came away with a much thicker skin, but I think a lot of it was just having to build trust. I think I did better with some donors than others, but I think in time, I'm hoping I see that those relationships seem to be stronger and better now. I was kind of after some bridges had been burned, so it might have been too fresh to be able to trust at that point. But I found, and I've tried to do this ever since, I want to be honest and not make any promises like there's no way we could do. I know sometimes it gets difficult. You get excited and you start promising things that, you still have to remember you have all those other collections and those other donors, and you don't want to lose the collection. But I think we have to show, I think there's a minimal level that we can promise everyone who gives us their collection. And if they want more, like I would like to do an oral history, I would like a traveling exhibit that this is going to take more money. It will take more staff time. What exactly it would take to be able to do this kind of project. And sometimes donors don't want to hear this, especially when they've been promised everything. Meaning, they aren't really, processing a collection isn't as sexy. What they want to see is an exhibit, do me an oral history, do some symposium, and we want to do a digital project, put everything online, and we have to do more work to be able to make that happen and to be realistic with them. It's not always money, it's also time and what other commitments that you have. So I think being able to be able to do things to start showing them that we will follow through with what we've committed to was really kind of a first step in making kind of smooth those bumpy roads.
I remember those days, Pam.
Yeah, I think you have a much better relationship with some of the women donors than when I was there, and I'm glad that some of the ladies were more like Janet, was very adaptable and gave me a chance, and others I didn't take it personally with some of the donors who were like Donna and others. I know you have good relations now, but I think it was still too fresh at that point that they were upset with GSU and the library, not me specifically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how do you think special collections and archives were viewed and supported, like by donors or by the community or on campus?
Say that again?
So how is special collections and archives supported? Like, and by that I was like, maybe by donors or the community or campus wide.
I think we had good support. I think the donors, the great thing about the special collections at Georgia State is that you have donors who are passionate about what you're documenting, what you're collecting, the stories. They may not be alum, they have no other ties to Georgia State, but they are passionate about the work you're doing. And they want to see you succeed, your program, and they will, if they don't have money, or they don't have the kind of things that you're trying to document or collect, they will help you make introductions to people. And I think you do a lot better when you have a donor who's had a great experience with you because they've come to your symposium and they see what you've done, whether it's oral histories and publishing or taking it to the classroom, getting students involved, being able to do travel, and allowing scholars and students and K through 12 come in and do their work and seeing what comes. They see that you're passionate and they get excited and they want to be able to make the introduction to people who might be able to help your program grow. So I think being able to work, to have the strong donor support, I see that especially with the labor and collection, you were able to move beyond the ERA movement, which is so exciting. And now you're doing so much beyond just that one moment in time. I think being able to get buy-in from our colleagues in other colleges, I think being able to do classes together, whether it was where you teach part of the class or do a one shot. But when we were doing the online curriculum for labor history, we were able to work with the College of Education, make sure that our curriculum met state guidelines. We were able to get the College of Education, they have the background, they know what these learning packets have to be able to be instituted into the classroom. They invited us to go to their conference for social studies in K through 12. And then we were able to, they taught the class, we were able to host where they had a 2-day workshop where teachers came in, learned how to use the curriculum for their classes, and then they were given the points that they needed to maintain their certification. So being able to work collaboratively can only enhance your program. It's something very important at the university level to show that we work closely with other colleges and departments on campus.
Yeah, that's a good answer. Now, we talked earlier about your donor base for the Southern Labour Archives, but what about more broadly, like across special collections? Who do you think were, like, what did you see as our donor base for special collections as a whole?
Well, I think that, I don't know that we had a donor base for the whole collection, but you had the labor community, especially the Atlanta labor community for Southern Labor Archives. You had the Johnny Mercer Foundation and the Friends of Johnny Mercer down in Savannah, and some of the professors on campus with the school and the Rialto that were donors, both financially and with records. And then with the women's collection, you had your core donors who had started out with the ERA movement archives, Georgia Women's Movement archives, but you were able to expand that and their interest in moving beyond and doing other areas of women's history. I think the group that started with the Georgia Women's Movement, there was a good group that really wanted to see the women's history. They felt very passionate about it, and I'm besides Janet, there were those who would host the salons, who would make introductions that really, I want to say the Women's Studies program on campus were with their two department heads that when I was our chairs of the program were really supportive of the archives. We would collaborate a lot together on a yearly event that we did for the collection, but also with the GAs and being able to get students interested. And I think you've grown that beyond, but I think just getting support of our faculty on campus, especially teaching faculty is really what helps grow your program and grew our archives.
So did you face any opposition or challenges to special collections and archives from the university administration, or was the administration supportive of your work?
I would say library administration was supportive in that we were able to get some positions, like I was able to get a full-time processing archivist, a full-time women's archivist. I know the names have changed now. When I first arrived at the department, were stressed. The units were kind of pitted against each other.
Yeah.
And I think by the time I became a department head, the library administration was aware of this, and they wanted to make a change. They were supportive in that I was able to show, if you give us a women's archivist, we were able to grow support. And that showed with the fundraising. I think they were more interested, honestly, in the fundraising part. But we were able to show products that we were able to, if you gave us a position, we could show you results by having this. We were also we're able to get a few staff positions as well. And that really helped us move the programs all within special collections more like, I don't want to say the big boys, but one of the things that Georgia State University Library at that time was very, very much interested in becoming an ARL, or Association Research Library. They wanted to be in that membership, and having a strong special collections was very well. That was one of their goals. So I think that helps support being able to make us a more robust program. I'd say the challenge with sorry, I'm mumbling now. So I would say for the program, yeah, there was support, and the way they showed it was being able to give us more positions and let us work more closely with the donors. On the flip side, administration became too interested in working with partners. What was your original question?
Did you face any oppositions or challenges from?
I would say the challenges would have been that opposition was with our donors. At that point, when over the few years I was department head, special collections came in number 2 of the amount of money raised at the university as a whole. The law school was first, and the library was second because of special collections. So that raised our profile, and that got a lot more attention by our dean at the time, and who wanted to become much more involved in our donor relations. So that caused some friction. As you know, donors like one-on-one attention, and between development and the dean, sometimes it would cause the archivist, the one who actually had to do the work and deal with whatever was negotiated, either to be completely left out or just kind of a third wheel. And so as we're building the program, we did face some hindrance in the dean becoming too involved in our donor negotiations. Like I said, I don't want us to promise anything that we can't follow through, or ask donors for things they are not at all interested in funding, such as funding a conference room. The dean at that point had asked the machinist to fund give us $100,000 to name a room for the conference room, and that is not anything they were interested in. They wanted something that would be for everybody and making their story known. So you kind of got to know your audience too.
For sure. So can you tell me, at the time, what was Special Collections and the library space like? And were you here for some of the renovations that took place?
Yeah. There had been some renovation over, are you in the north side or south side?
South, we're south side.
Okay. There had been some renovation in the south in that first entryway downstairs. We, in Special Collections, had our reading room, which I believe is your workroom. That was a reading room. We moved the reading room to where I believe it is now. That had used to be the Johnny Mercer exhibit area. And so it was a matter of making the reading room actually had been bigger, and to move it into a smaller space, and then to begin moving people out of the back, which I think is now your shelving area, but there were people's offices were in that back area too, to begin moving some people out of there into what was the reading room at that point. So we had some cubicles, which I think at that point we only had like 4 back there. And then where the reading room desk had remained. We also had, originally when you came in, there was like a reception desk area, which I think became one. I don't know how you do it now, but there was this big, I'm sorry, I'm going to use colloquial, honking reception desk that we would have students at, and that got removed and now is more of your gallery space area. But that was really all we were starting to talk about the plan for the future and what that would look like, and how we could get more space. At that point, we're looking at the basement level in the building, where the computer lab was, and the idea was they were going to move that out within 5 to 10 years, and then that could become storage space for Special Collections. But we hadn't got beyond just the planning stages.
Cool. Were there any major events or momentous occasions that you recall while you were working there?
Of course. Let's see. Well, one of the major events that we had was, of course, the 90th, I know you're beyond that now, the 90th anniversary of the founding of Georgia State University. And that was one of the things I was really proud of. The whole department, we came together, we helped create multiple exhibits in the gallery space, had talks. We had an event that featured the Panther. I can't remember what his name was.
Pounce.
Say that again?
Pounce.
Pounce the Panther. He came, because I still have a picture of my son with Pounce, and the president attended, and people like Morna Gerard and others went out and got some giveaways from local businesses. So we had kind of a trivia game, and if you won, we gave you prizes. But it was kind of like a month of programming and talks and kind of a birthday party. That it was nice because I felt like it was truly an event that everyone in Special Collections helped participate in to make it happen. The opening of the Mercer Reading Room, it was going to be a bigger event than it was. It actually ended up being a snow day, so the university was closed, which is a rarity. But people, bless their hearts, still in special collections, and others, people within the library came on in so we could have the event, because we had the president of the Johnny Mercer Foundation, Margaret Whiting, and her husband, Jack Wrangler, fly in from New York for this. And I just remember, how do you hold a donor event on a day that the university is closed? But we made it happen, and we, the important people, whoever that is, but I think the president and the provost and the dean were all there. The IAM, the International Association of Machinists Executive Council, came for a visit. And it was like the first time since 1988 that they had a meeting in Atlanta. As you know, we had to find the one hotel in Atlanta that had a union, the Hilton at that point, so they could stay there. We had a dinner for them. We also worked with Les Hoff, who organized a bus tour of all the labor sites in Atlanta, especially the founding, like there's a statue of the founding of the machinists over by the zoo, the Atlanta Zoo. Is that?
Yep.
Grant Park?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. I was like, what's the name? Yes. It was, and of course it was the Atlanta bus, who is also, the bus drivers are members of a union. So you have to be very careful. You make sure everything you do, the one union caterer was able to, but it was great to be able to have the executive committee with the IAM president and the vice presidents all there to be able to see their collection. And that's where actually when we got to make the next morning they had a closed session meeting where I was able to go and make my case on how much it would cost to digitize their collection. But it was a big deal to be able to get them to come to campus and see their collection. I know with the Mercer collection, one of the events that I thought was one of the best was they have an event every year in Savannah where they celebrate the birthday of Johnny Mercer. And the night before, we hosted a, what do you call it, a low country boil. Some of the friends found us a place to host this party. So they found us the place. It was right on the water. We invited the friends of Mercer as well as some important VIPs. We had like an executive vice president for Walt Disney there, as well as others. And it was just a really relaxed, fun evening, having Georgia State represented in Savannah, as well as some of Mercer's family. They started off the day by having, we had to go to Belafonte Gardens, where Johnny's actually buried. It's a beautiful old cemetery in Savannah, and his niece made us all sing some Johnny Mercer songs. And then we went over, and if you know anything about Savannah, you have to have drinks. So there was food there too, but there was a lot of drinking too. And I think it really helped enhance, building those relations. And I want to say the women, I brought it up earlier, but the women are always inspiring to me, whether it was your annual event to highlight the sheroes and having a guest speaker. I know you've gone way beyond that now, and then also having the salons out at houses in Buckhead where you would have a speaker come in or someone to talk, and just, I always learned so much and gained, felt so passionate and felt like we are really doing a great thing. I think there was a lot of those, and I just really appreciated how, you know, it's one of the few times where you feel like I am making a difference. And this is how, and I was always inspired by the women's events that you had.
That's great. How do you think because we're like Georgia State's right down in the heart of Atlanta.
Mhm.
How do you think the collections relate to the Atlanta community?
I think they relate to the Atlanta community in that we're documenting at that point and beyond, is that you're documenting the stories of our everyday citizens and what they're doing to make Atlanta better and stronger. So whether it's the labor movement or it's all these movements, it's this cry for social justice, whether it's organized or unorganized. And I think that was the one thing that we as a department as a whole wanted to make sure that we were not only getting the stories of organized efforts, but also I don't know if that's the right word you want, not necessarily unorganized, but
More
um,
grassroots.
more grassroots, yes. And I think that is something that starting from David Gracie going into trash cans and dumpster diving to get uh, the IAM #1 out of the trash to being able to like, just imagine that's how our first collection came at Georgia State to uh, building a world-class collection, but also keeping in touch with our roots, which is really how we struggle, how we um, win. Sometimes we don't do what we thought we were going to. Sometimes it's a step back, but I think it's great to be able to have all this documented and that people are exploring and going back and seeing whether it was a movement of some kind, what worked, what didn't. Maybe you could see what could have been done better. Maybe you can lessons learned and you can move it forward. I think uh, Georgia State Special Collections has really been good at getting those stories as they're happening, going back into the past. I mean, history is always now, but you have to learn from the past for the future kind of thing. But I think Georgia State's been very strong in getting the community story.
So, thinking more broadly about GSU and the campus, what was GSU and its campus like at the time that you were working here?
When I started, what I found very interesting is it was the first urban university I had worked at. So right downtown Atlanta, there was a housing project that I drove through on my way to work. But the campus itself was very multicultural. Um, Let me remember how it was said. The minority is the majority, but there was no majority minority.
There you go.
You feel like you need a whiteboard for that, don't you? There are a lot of first generation students. And the university was very much thinking about its master plan, how to think about its renovation and expanding its space to make it a more inclusive and provide a sense of community. At the time in early 2000s, you still have remnants of that 60s brutalistic architecture where you wanted to raise the university above street level. And the idea was to be able that you could walk above the streets and never actually have to be at the street to get around campus. There were supposed to be all these secret tunnels and things. I found some of them, but I didn't get them all. So bringing the idea in the master plan was to bring it back down to street level and make more of a green space. There wasn't any green space at all. I do know with the students, Georgia State had very much been a commuter college. That's how it started. And with the, in the 90s, when Georgia got the lottery and money was going toward education and the Hope Scholarship, Georgia State for the first time was having a lot more young people come to college. and needing a dorm to stay. At that point, Georgia State didn't really have too many dorms except for dorms that they shared with Georgia Tech, which had been part of the Olympic Village. You also had 18-year-olds going to college, and they were at that point more used to people working and then coming in the evening, so more evening classes, older, not young adults, but more older adults. So they weren't used to some of the things that they were having to deal with at that point, like underage drinking and trying to figure out how to live on your own. And so this area was all new, and just trying to figure out, Georgia State really wanted to become more of a influencer at the, you had University of Georgia Tech and the Georgia State universities, the three universities. Georgia Southern University came shortly in the 2000s, and they really wanted to raise their standards for their students. They were getting more students coming in because of the Hope Scholarship, and just trying to figure out how you were going to deal with all the students and where you're going to put them and how to make sure we were providing the space and the classes that they needed to teach with, just enhancing everything at the campus.
Yeah. And at the time you were here, did you see women in leadership roles?
At the dean level, yes, but not really in the higher administrative, like presidency or vice presidents on the campus were mostly white males.
Yeah.
And I would say with the women on campus, it was mostly, I would say mostly the leadership from the dean up was mostly white, even though we were a multicultural campus.
So when did you leave Georgia State?
I left in 2006.
And where did you go?
I went to Southern Illinois University in Carbondale to be director of their special collections in university archives.
And what attracted you to that position?
I think part of it, what attracted me was I applied and I was accepted. Meaning when I got the head of special collections, the dean at the time just there was no search. I was just kind of made that position, and so I always felt like I wanted to feel like I earned that position, if that makes sense.
Makes complete sense.
The other was I just needed a change in my career.
Cool. And how long did you stay there?
Oh my goodness, I stayed there 13 years.
And where are you now?
I'm at the University of Illinois at Chicago. I'm head of special collections and university archives. And July 1st, I will be interim associate university librarian.
Woo!
Yeah.
And are you happy with where you are in Chicago?
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of Georgia State, an urban university. It has one of those, it started as a commuter college. It's mostly a multicultural campus, which I really love. I really love being in a campus. I did miss that. I really like that about Georgia State too, just seeing a multicultural, a very active campus, you have cultural centers trying to make an inclusive campus, and that just really excites me. The archives needs a little refocus, but I'm working with a good group of people. Just like when I worked at Georgia State, I really, really loved working with the staff. We had such a great staff and who were energetic and enthusiastic and had really great ideas. And I just love working with people who are really passionate and really who really enjoy what they do.
I have one last question for you.
Mm-hmm.
What's your most memorable story from GSU?
I would say, well, can I tell you two and you can pick which one?
You can tell me a bunch if you want.
Okay, it was a Friday afternoon, and all of a sudden, everyone in special collections, everybody in the library on the north, got called over to the south campus. And we were told that bricks were falling off the building. And if a wind of 40 miles or more happened to come down Atlanta and hit our building, there was a good chance it would collapse. So, of course, for those of us who had worked there for a little while at least, knew that some hurricane, by then probably a tropical depression, but had moved through Atlanta and spun tornadoes, and the winds had been more than 40 miles an hour. So I think a brick had fallen, and they were really afraid that somebody walking the street would actually get hit in the head. So we had to move over to the other side of the street for a time, and having to, if we needed to go to our office, you could only go at certain hours. You had to wear a hard hat. You had to take a walkie-talkie. You had to report when you left, and you had to report when you got back. If the wind came above more than 30, then there was supposed to be an alarm so that you would quickly leave the building. And I'm not really sure. We all went from 2 buildings to 1, but we certainly did. And I think at that point, the head of special collections was on vacation. So when the head of special collections would not be in the office, one of the unit heads would get to be, in charge. So I happened to be in charge during that, and it was just pack up what you need and then a box and move over, and you really had like no more than 30 minutes to figure out what you needed and how long you would be over there. So it sounds familiar though.
Oh yeah.
But while we were over there was also when as a group was when 9/11 happened, and that was probably the most bizarre time for us, because we were all really in the same workroom together. I think we had like divider walls, but there wasn't a whole lot of privacy, and just how stunned silent everybody was. And I think it was just a shock to, I always had a radio on. I don't anymore, but I always had to have some kind. So I had my radio on, not loud, but somehow everybody found out fairly quickly the craziness going on and the fear, and just not seeing. I think we got just dismissed a little later in the day because there was fear that something might happen in Atlanta, but just, I don't think that ever leaves you. Just, you know where you were and who you were with, and that memory will always stay with me.
They're pretty strong memories.
Yeah.
I have one last question, and that is to ask you, is there anything else you want to tell me that I haven't asked you about? Or any last thoughts?
I would say probably my my last thought is I think my experience at Georgia State University provided me an opportunity to grow in areas I don't know that I would have ever been able to had I stayed in the position where it was. I really appreciated the opportunity from, being kind of a processing archivist, really in my sense of the word, to getting to, having the opportunity to expand and learn donor relationships and be more proactive in outreach and working with faculty on campus, to being able to be a manager and I hope a leader, to be able to work with, like I said, some really great people that helped me learn a lot. And I've always felt like by having that opportunity, I've been able to pay it forward, I hope, to others to be encouraging, but to give people the opportunities to grow in areas that they would like to. And I would never have been able to, I don't think, be where I am today if I hadn't had that opportunity while I was at Georgia State.
That's a great place to stop. So I want to thank you very much for taking part in this. And, I look forward to chatting to you separately about all sorts of other things at some point. So I'm going to turn this off now.
Okay.
To here.